Chapter 2 of Treachery in Outer Space by Carey Rockwell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2. Gentlemen, please! Commander Walters, the Commandant of Space Academy, stood behind his desk and slammed his fist down sharply on its plastic top. I must insist that you control your tempers and refrain from these repeated outbursts, he growled. The angry voices that had filled the room began to subside, but Walters did not continue his address. He stood, arms folded across his chest, glaring at the assembled group of men until, one by one, they stopped talking and shifted nervously in their chairs. When the room was finally still, the commander glanced significantly at Captain Steve Strong, standing at the side of the desk, smiled grimly, and then resumed in a calm, conversational tone of voice. I am quite aware that we have departed from standard operational procedure in this case, he said slowly. Heretofore, the Solar Guard has always granted interplanetary shipping contracts to private companies on the basis of sealed bids, the most reasonable bid winning the job. However, for the job of hauling Titan crystal to Earth, we have found that method unsatisfactory. Therefore, we have devised this new plan to select the right company. And let me repeat, Walters leaned forward over his desk and spoke in a firm, decisive voice. This decision was reached in a special executive session of the Council of the Solar Alliance last night. A short, wiry man suddenly rose from his chair in the front row, his face clearly showing his displeasure. All right, get on with it, Walters, he snapped, deliberately omitting the courtesy of addressing the commander by his title. Don't waste our time with that official hogwash. It might work on your cadets and your tin soldiers, but not on us. There was a murmur of agreement from the assembled group of men. Present were some of the wealthiest and most powerful shipping magnates in the entire Solar Alliance, men who controlled vast fleets of commercial spaceships and whose actions and decisions carried a great deal of weight. Each hoped to win the Solar Guard contract to transport Titan crystal from the mines of the tiny satellite back to Earth. Combining steel-like strength and durability with its great natural beauty, the crystal was replacing metal in all construction work, and the demand was enormous. The shipping company that got the job would have a guaranteed income for years to come, and each of the men present was fighting with every weapon at his command to win the contract. Heartened by the reaction of the men around him, the speaker pressed his advantage. We've all hauled cargo for the Solar Guard before, and the sealed bid system was perfectly satisfactory then, he shouted. Why isn't it satisfactory now? What's all this nonsense about a space race? Again, the murmur filled the room, and the men glared accusingly at Walters. But the commander refused to knuckle down to any show of arrogance. He fixed a cold, stony eye on the short man. Mr. Brett, he snapped in a biting voice, you have been invited to this meeting as a guest, not by any right you think you have as the owner of a shipping company. A guest, I said, and I ask that you conduct yourself with that social obligation in mind. Before Brett could reply, Walters turned away from him and addressed the others calmly. Despite Mr. Brett's outburst, his question is a good one, and the answer is quite simple. The bids submitted by your companies were not satisfactory in this case because we believe that they were made in bad faith. For once there was silence in the room, as the men stared at Walters in shocked disbelief. There are 14 shipping companies represented in this room, some of them the most respected in the Solar Alliance, he continued, his voice edged with knife-like sarcasm. I cannot find it in my conscience to accuse all of you of complicity in this affair, but nevertheless we are faced with one of the most startling coincidences I have ever seen. Walters paused and looked around the room, measuring the effect of his words. Satisfied, he went on grimly. There isn't enough difference between the bids of each of you, not 5 credits worth of difference, to award the contract to any single company. The men in the room gasped in amazement. The bids were exactly alike. The only differences we found were in operational procedure, but the cost to the Solar Guard amounted to, in the end, exactly the same thing from each of you. The inference is clear, I believe, he added mockingly. "Someone stole the minimum specifications and circulated them among you." In the shocked quiet that followed Walter's statement, no one noticed Tom, Roger, and Astro slip into the room. They finally caught the eye of Captain Strong, who acknowledged their presence with a slight nod as they found seats in the rear of the room. "Commander," a voice spoke up from the middle of the group, "may I make a statement?" "Certainly, Mr. Bernard," agreed Walters, and stepped back from his desk as a tall, slender man in his late 30s rose to address the men around him. The 3 space cadets stared at him with interest. They had heard of Kit Barnard. A former Solar Guard officer, he had resigned from the great military organization to go into private space freight business. Though a newcomer, with only a small outfit, he was well liked and respected by every man in the room, and everyone present knew that when he spoke, he would have something important to say, or at least advance a point that should be brought to light. "I have no doubt," said Bernard in a slow, positive manner, "that the decision to substitute a space race between us as a means of awarding the contract was well considered by the Solar Council." He turned and shot Brett a flinty look. "And under the circumstances, I, for one, accept their decision." He sat down abruptly. There were cries of "Hear, hear!" "Righto!" "Very good!" "No!" shouted Brett, leaping to his feet. "By the craters of Luna, it isn't right! I demand to know exactly who submitted the lowest bid!" Walters sighed and shuffled through several papers on his desk. "You were within your rights, Mr. Brett," he said, eyeing the men speculatively. "It was you." "Then why in blue blazes didn't I get the contract?" screamed Brett. "For several reasons," replied Walters. "Your contract offered us the lowest bid in terms of money, but specified very slow schedules. On the other hand, Universal Spaceways Limited planned faster schedules, but at a higher cost. Kit Barnard outbid both of you in money and schedules, but he has only 2 ships, and we were doubtful of his ability to complete the contract should one of his ships crack up. The other companies offered, more or less, the same conditions. So you can understand our decision now, Mr. Brett." Walters paused and glared at the man. "The Solar Council sat in continuous 48-hour session and considered everyone. The space race was finally decided on and voted for by every member. Schedules were the most vital point under consideration, but other points could not be ignored, and these could only be determined by actual performance. Now, does that answer all your questions, Mr. Brett?" "No, it doesn't!" yelled Brett. "Oh, sit down, Brett!" shouted a voice from the back of the room. "Yes, sit down and shut up!" called another. "We're in this too, you know." Brett turned on them angrily, but finally sat down, scowling. In the rear of the room, Tom nudged Roger. "Boy, the commander sure knows how to lay it on the line when he wants to, doesn't he?" "I'll say," replied Roger. "That guy Brett better watch out. Both the commander and Captain Strong look as if they're ready to pitch him out on his ear." 6 feet tall and looking crisp, sure, and confident in his black and gold uniform, Captain Steve Strong stood near Walters and scowled at Brett. Unit instructor for the Polaris crew and Commander Walters' executive officer, Strong was not as adept as Walters in masking his feelings, and his face clearly showed his annoyance at Brett's outbursts. He had sat the full 48 hours with the council while they argued, not over costs, but in an effort to make sure that none of the companies would be slighted in their final decision. It made his blood boil to see someone like Brett selfishly disregard these efforts at fairness. "That is all the information I can give you, gentlemen," said Walters finally. "Thank you for your kind attention." He shot an ironic glance at Brett. "And for your understanding of a difficult situation. Now you must excuse me. Captain Strong, whom you all know, will fill in the details of the race." As Walters left the room, Strong stepped to the desk, faced the assembly, and spoke quickly. "Gentlemen, perhaps some of you are acquainted with the present jet car race that takes place each year. The forerunner of that race was the Indianapolis 500-mile race of some few hundred years ago. We have adopted their rules for our own speed tests." Time trials will be held, with all interested companies contributing as many ships that they think can qualify, and the 3 ships that make the fastest time will be entered in the actual race. This way we can eliminate the weaker contenders and reduce the chance of accidents taking place millions of miles out in space. Also, it will result in a faster time for the winner. Now the details of the race will be given to your chief pilots, crew chiefs, and power deck officers at a special meeting in my office here in the Tower Building tomorrow. You will receive all information and regulations governing the minimum and maximum size of the ships entered, types of reactor units, and amounts of ballast to be carried. "How many in the crew?" asked a man in the front. "2," replied Steve, "or, if the ship is mostly automatic, 1. Either can be used. The Solar Guard will monitor the race, sending along one of the heavy cruisers." Strong glanced at his notes. "That is all, gentlemen. Are there any questions?" There were no questions, and the men began to file out of the room. Strong was relieved to see Brett was among the first to leave. He didn't trust himself to keep his temper with the man. As the room emptied, Strong stood at the door and grabbed Kit Barnard by the sleeve. "Hello, spaceman," he cried. "Long time no see." "Hello, Steve," replied Kit with a slow, warm smile. "Say, is that the way to greet an old friend after 4, or is it 5 years?" "5," replied Kit. "You look worried, fellow," said Strong. "I am. This race business leaves me holding the bag." "How's that?" "Well, I made a bid on the strength of a new reactor unit I'm trying to develop," explained Kit. "If I'd gotten the contract, I could have made a loan from the Universal Bank and completed my work easily. But now—" Kit stopped and shook his head slowly. "What is this reactor?" Strong asked. "Something new?" "Yes, 1/4 the size of present standard reactors and less than half the weight." Kit's eyes began to glow with enthusiasm as he spoke. "It would give me extra space in my ships and be economical enough on fuel for me to be able to compete with the larger outfits in their bigger ships. Now all I've got is a reactor that hasn't been tested properly, that I'm not even sure will work on a log hull and in a hot race." "Is there any way you can soup up one of your present reactors to make this run?" asked Strong. "I suppose so," added Kit. "I'll give the other fellows a run for their money, all right, but it'll take every credit I have, and if I don't win the race, I'm finished. Washed up." "Excuse me, Captain Strong," said Tom Corbett, coming to attention. "Major Connell ordered us to report here for special assignment." "Oh, yes," said Strong, turning to Tom, Roger, and Astro with a smile. "Meet Kit Barnard. Kit, Tom Corbett, Roger Manning, and Astro, the Polaris unit. My unit," he added proudly. The boys saluted respectfully, and Barnard smiled and shook hands with each of them. "You've heard about the race now," said Strong to Tom. "Yes, sir," replied the young cadet. "It sounds exciting." "It will be, with spacemen like Kit Barnard, Charlie Brett, and the other men of the big outfits competing. You're going to work with me on the time trials, and later the Polaris will be the ship that monitors the race. But first, you 3 will be inspectors." "Of what, sir?" asked Roger. "You'll see that all regulations are observed, that no one gets the jump on anyone else. These men will be souping up their reactors until those ships will be nothing but go, and it's your job to see that they use only standard equipment." "We're going to be real popular when we tell a spaceman he can't use a unit he's rigged up specially," commented Astro with a grin. Tom laughed. "We'll be known as the cadets you love to hate." "Especially when you run up against Charlie Brett," said Kit. The cadets looked at the veteran spaceman inquiringly, but he was not smiling, and they suddenly felt a strange chill of apprehension. End of Chapter 2.